For this episode I'm covering a case that has been requested, and I want to give people what they want, so here we are. Now, if you're anything like me, you sometimes get peckish. You know, you get that feeling that you want a snack of some kind. Yet, on occasion, you don't actually know what you want. And a frequent thing that happens in this scenario is you find yourself standing in front of the fridge, door open, pondering the options. And when one opens the fridge, there are a range of things one may expect to see. Snack foods, milk, drinks, salad, cooked meats, and the like. There are also things you wouldn't expect to see, like a koala bear, David Duchovny, carpeting, and, well, human heads. And as you may have guessed, this latter is a feature of today's case. So without further ado, this is the case of Fred and Edwina Rogers, and this is Murder of Crows. For this episode we're going back to 1965, and contrary to popular belief, I hadn't been born yet. I know you were thinking it. Don't lie to me. Anywho, we're going to Houston, Texas, to look at a case that has, for various reasons, become blurred between fact and fiction. The crime having occurred in a much less documented time has allowed accounts to be told and accepted with much less ability to fact check. Our main character's life and career has also encouraged a degree of latitude in considering what this man may have done or was capable of doing. And this was perhaps aided by the man's own tendency to behave surreptitiously and suspiciously. And those tendencies may have also catalyzed the nature of the stories told. I will tell the man's story as factually as I can, according to the accurate sources I could find. But the nature of his life will allow you to see how the lines have been blurred, and that the man's career allowed many of these stories to be believable. Whatever the truth, we need to remember that two people were brutally murdered. So as we navigate these shades of grey, the basic facts are that two people were killed before their time. And as we cogitate and hypothesize, I am fully aware that two people, while apparently far from perfect, suffered unnecessarily. So on with our tale. Fred and Edwina Rogers lived in Houston, Texas, and were born in 1884 and 1892, respectively. Their son Charles was born on the 30th of December 1921, and it is his life that we need to focus on to give context to our story regarding the death of his parents. Now, Charles was unquestionably extremely intelligent and capable. After dropping out of Texas A&M University, he attended the University of Houston and got a degree in nuclear physics. With America's entering the Second World War, eventually, Rogers served as a pilot for the US Navy, as well as serving in the Office of Naval Intelligence. And all of these achievements occurred before Rogers hit his mid-20s. Oh, and he also apparently spoke just the 7 languages. After the war, he transferred his scientific abilities to a career as a seismologist for Shell, where he had an uncanny flair for finding underground sources of oil and gas. During this time, he continued his interest in flying by turning his skills to a role with the Civil Air Patrol, which is effectively the civilian voluntary program which acts as a civilian branch of the Air Force, if you will. It was here that he apparently met a man called David Ferry, and I'll talk about why this may have been important in just a little while. In 1957, in an act which adds fuel to the many fires of conspiracy and confusion that surround Rogers' life, he quit his job as a seismologist without offering any explanation. Before we come to the indisputable facts of what happened to Fred and Edwina Rogers, we need to discuss what may have, could have, and might have happened in 1963 involving Charles Rogers. And this comes back to his possibly meeting David Ferry in the Civil Air Patrol in the mid-1950s. What is a confirmed fact is that David Ferry was a pilot and that he became an instructor within the Civil Air Patrol, and as such could well have met Charles Rogers. What is also factual is the fact that Ferry was known to be involved in several anti-government activities, which extended to his being firmly against John F. Kennedy and his administration after he became president. And in particular, Ferry was aggrieved by the president's stance on the whole Bay of Pigs situation. A further fact, which is almost certainly true, is that Ferry was the instructor of a 15-year-old Lee Harvey Oswald, yes, that one, when the latter joined the Civil Air Patrol as a cadet. When taken together, it becomes easy to see how conspiracy theories have been developed based on these facts. When you take into account that we will never know the truth, it's easy to see how people have been tempted to, and they had the latitude to, create possible truths that cannot be completely debunked. But what typically happens when there are gaps in factual information is that theories are developed based on other theories, and the truth becomes lost in the quagmire of ideas and fantasy, and it becomes increasingly difficult to dissect reality from the fiction, especially when groups of people are espousing these ideas as the absolute truth. Of course, I now need to talk about one of the most notorious crimes in history. To look at facts and then the theories of the possible involvement of Charles Rogers. We know with certainty that John F. Kennedy was murdered in Dallas on November the 22nd, 1963. And it has been widely accepted that Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin from a position within the Texas School Book Depository. But this has never been completely confirmed. And while that uncertainty exists, it gives leeway for alternative theories, and the fact of the ongoing conspiracy theories of CIA involvement in the assassination and the CIA rumours have actually gained credence rather than faded away. All of this allows one to wonder if there must be more than a grain of truth to this being a layered mission rather than a one-man rage-fueled plot to kill the president. If we accept this hypothesis, then obviously we need to ask who the other players would have been, with Oswald as the unwitting patsy or fall guy. David Ferrie's military background and anti-Kennedy stance would certainly make him a candidate for involvement. Then we need to move to another fact that has allowed for theories to be formed. And that is the three tramps situation. It is a fact that 3 men were apprehended by police near the book depository just after the assassination of John Kennedy. And these men were pictured being escorted by police on that day. These men were considered transient, and their proximity to events sent theorists into overdrive. There have been no less than 8 men proposed for these 3 tramps, and yes, getting back on topic, Charles Rogers was one of the men considered as being one of the 3 tramps, given his likely knowledge of David Ferrie and possibly the young Lee Harvey Oswald too. The influence of Ferry could, I stress could, have led Rogers to become embedded in anti-government leanings and then quitting his job, because he did quit his job without warning. But this is all conjecture. We will never know unless facts come to light. And as more time passes, it becomes less likely that facts will come to light, giving theorists all the margins they need to push guesswork as potential facts. But it does make for good stories, and I am, after all, a storyteller. The bottom line is that it is possible that Rogers was involved, but we cannot say for sure either way. But now we need to move back into Charles Rogers' personal life to look at what happened a couple of years after the assassination of John Kennedy. By 1965, Charles Rogers was without employment, and as such necessity meant that he returned to live with his parents. By this time, Fred would have been in his 80s, while Edwina would have been in her 70s. Charles was considered within the local neighbourhood as reclusive, and he would leave the home at dawn and not return until after dusk, and he apparently communicated with his parents by passing notes beneath his bedroom door. Again, this is based on things that have been said, but his routine seems to be a matter of record. Safe to say, he was a secretive and insular man at this time. On the 23rd of June 1965, Marvin, who was a nephew of Edwina, who was close with his aunt and kept in close communication with her, well, Marvin had become concerned enough by not being able to contact Edwina for several days that he contacted the Houston police to request a welfare check. So the police duly went to the residence, and they ended up making entry into the Rogers home. On first impressions, nothing seemed out of place, but there was no one in the home, and there seemed to be uneaten meals on the dining table. If this element was curious, what was found in the refrigerator was batshit crazy. Upon inspecting the contents, they saw what appeared to be fresh cuts of freshly prepared meat stacked on the shelves. Not unusual in and of itself, but as the officer was about to close the door of the fridge, something caught his eye. And on closer inspection, he found 2 human heads in the vegetable bin. What the actual fuck? Rather unsurprisingly, the heads were those of Fred and Edwina. The fresh stacks of meat were the limbs and torsos of the couple, and local searches turned up the organs of both of them in the sewers nearby because they had been flushed down the toilet, as you do. But through all of this, notable by his absence was Charles Rogers. Autopsies revealed that Edwina had been shot in the head execution style, but Fred had been treated with much greater disdain and aggression and anger, with his eyes being gouged out, his genitals being removed, and his cause of death being blunt force trauma caused by a claw hammer to the head. The crime scene had been meticulously cleaned, as had the remains of Fred and Edwina, but there were traces of blood that formed a trail leading to Charles Rogers' room. A warrant was issued for Charles Rogers, but this saw him labelled as a material witness rather than a suspect. There were rumours that Fred and Edwina were emotionally abusive towards Charles, with Fred in particular being the more verbally aggressive, and Fred even allegedly stole money from his son. So Charles had motive, means and opportunity, and there were never any alternative suspects found. And the abuse and theft could have given Charles additional rage towards his father. I will stick my neck out here and say that Charles almost certainly killed his parents, but that is an educated guess based on circumstantial evidence. So take it with as much salt as the Dead Sea. Charles Rogers was never found and was declared legally dead in 1975 to allow his estate to be probated. But perhaps in keeping with the rest of his life, much of what actually happened to Fred and Edwina Rogers and what became of Charles Rogers is based on guesswork, rumours and theories, which in the context of Charles Rogers' life feels quite apt. But of course there is not the final closure that facts provide. So there is a level of discomfort that comes from not knowing. The mystery and urban myths make this an interesting story. But Fred and Edwina were very real victims of brutal and violent deaths, and the treatment of their remains meant that they had no dignity in death. Whatever their flaws, they did not deserve to die like this and have their bodies treated with such wanton disdain. The house in which the murders took place was located at 1815 Driscoll Street. And after the murders, the house remained empty and unsold until it was demolished in 1972. The lot remained empty until the year 2000, when condos were built on the lot, and the last physical vestiges of the Rogers' physical presence were lost to time. It has been proposed that Charles Rogers fled to Mexico and ended up dying in Honduras. But much like the rest of his story, it is heavily based in guesswork and theories. But there were very real victims, and we should remember them, irrespective of the story they are wrapped up in. And as such, this video is dedicated to Fred and Edwina Rogers, who were treated so cruelly and appallingly in and after death. I truly hope that they are at peace. Thank you for watching something of a rabbit hole episode of Murder of Crows, one that was requested by Carl, and I hope I've done justice to this really weird and convoluted tale. With all of that said, I'm Steve, this chunky monkey is Samson, and we will see you when we see you, won't we? Yes, we will.